Hey everybody, this is Darren Van Dam and you are watching Flick Connection, the show that helps you get more out of movies. And today I'm going to talk about 20 movies in pairs that make great but extremely bloody double features.
When I see you, I see blood in the water. Run deep, it runs deep. Blood in the water. I see blood in the water. Try me, you see blood in the water.
So just to reiterate, there's going to be 20 movies on this list, but it's going to be 10 double feature pairs. Even though a lot of these movies are disgusting, today's sponsor is delicious. It's Universal Yums, and I'll tell you more about their great snack offerings later in this video. But let's go ahead and start all the way at the back of the pack with my number 10 double feature, which features some people on psychedelic drugs that go absolutely bonkers. Now, the first in this double feature is Climax. This is one of the latest movies from director Gaspar Noé, who is famous for disturbing movies, and Climax is no exception. This is about a group of dancers who are not at a party, they're like practicing or something. I don't know, I don't really care, but someone spikes the punch and everyone loses their minds. Now, to set this one up, it is an art film. The first quarter or so of this movie, maybe the first third, is just these people hanging out, a lot of discussions. Some of it is relevant to how everything else plays out, and some of it is not. I'll say it again. This is an art film, not for everyone. But as the drugs start to take hold, the movie turns into a single shot take type of a film. That means it all appears to take place in one shot, and there is some wild stuff going on at this party. If that sounds remotely interesting to you, you may actually dig this one. If you're not into art films and nothing I'm saying is exciting you, you could skip this one, but you may still like the other pick on this double feature, Anonymous 616. Now, this features friend of the show, Daniel Dewelden, in an amazing performance. He punches above the weight of this movie by far. In this movie, he and a group of friends decide to take some DMT, and after coming out of the DMT trip, he begins to communicate with something over the internet that becomes increasingly nefarious, and his actions become, I don't even know if nefarious is the right word. This is a brutal movie, it's bloody, it's disturbing, there's some really off-putting elements to this one, as there are with the other. If you're easily disturbed, steer far clear of this double feature, but there are some on this list that are much lighter than this one, including my next double feature, which is even bloodier, but lighter and a lot more fun. That starts off with Guns Akimbo. Now, this is one of the newer releases to come to Prime Video, and this is actually from the same director as my next pick, Deathgasm. We'll talk about that in 1 minute. But Guns Akimbo features Daniel Radcliffe in this sort of bonkers alternate reality sort of future thing where there's this deathmatch type game taking place over the internet and in real life. And in the midst of all this, he has guns surgically attached to his hands against his will, mind you, and it's sort of a 24-hour race for him to put his life back together and defeat the bad guys. It's kind of set up like a game. There's not a whole lot of artistic value or merit to this movie, other than it just being kind of zany and fun. If you like movies like Shaun of the Dead, this is just a fun watch that is bloody and brutal, but it's all fairly good natured. There's a sense of fun about the whole project. If that sounds like you, definitely check it out. Now, if you like that pick, you're gonna like my next one as well, because it's done by the same director prior to Guns Akimbo, and that is Deathgasm. Now, this is about a metal band who discovers this sheet music that summons demons. That's all you need to know. I mentioned Shaun of the Dead in comparison to Guns Akimbo. It has even more in common with Deathgasm, because rather than zombies, you're dealing with sort of these mindless demons. Heads are exploding, chainsaws are running, people are getting beat to death with giant black dildos. It's wild stuff, and again, just in a sense of fun. However, it's just full-on adult humor with this one. Buckets of blood, but also a lot of sexual references and stuff. Like I said, it's fun, but watch this one when the kids are out of town. Now, longtime subscribers know that I love me some good gangster movies, and my next double feature features one of the newest releases to come to the platform. In fact, I think it is the newest new release. This movie was actually released during COVID, and that is Capone, starring Tom Hardy as Al Capone. Now, do not go into this one expecting your typical gangster movie. Go into the next one expecting that. Capone is really about his dementia. Late in Al Capone's life, after he was released from prison, he had syphilis, which preys on the mind. And this movie is sort of about him not just dealing with his demons, but dealing with dementia and dealing with the fact that he's done countless horrible things to countless people. And those two things sort of come to a head. And what you get is not a gangster movie. You get sort of a mixture of this like historical drama and like a horror movie, kind of like The Shining. Now, like I said, do not go into Capone expecting one or the other. It's a hybrid of both, and it's really unlike anything that you've probably seen. It's bloody, it's brutal at times, but it's incredibly interesting. Now, if you want just a kind of a traditional gangster flick, my next pick is Kill the Irishman. Now, everyone went nuts for The Irishman. I'm as big a Martin Scorsese fan as anyone. And as good and as high quality as The Irishman actually was in the way it was produced, Kill the Irishman is a much more entertaining watch. It's just fun. There's a mixture of some really great performances alongside some sort of TV level performances, but this movie just moves. This is a true story of an actual Irish man with mob ties who the mob put a bunch of hits out on, and they could not kill this guy. So you get a bunch of failed assassinations, you get him just throwing down on people in really just sort of classic gangster movie entertaining ways, including a biker party beatdown that's somewhat reminiscent of the A Bronx Tale barroom lock-in scene, which is one of the more famous scenes in a mob movie ever. Now, while Kill the Irishman is not up there with the greatest mob movies ever made, it is easily appreciated by anyone who loves those types of movies. Now, if you're looking for something that has more undead zombies actually in the movie compared to the ones that I've talked about so far, my next pairing both feature loads of them with Overlord and Dead Snow Red vs. Dead. Now, the first one in this double feature is pretty intense. This came out last summer and is, I think, a fun horror movie. It didn't quite meet expectations, but to be fair, expectations were pretty high for this movie. I agree with the fact that it didn't meet those expectations, but that does not mean that I don't recommend this movie. I enjoyed it. I do think it is sort of a fun war fantasy thing where there's this weird sci-fi element. It's got kind of a throwback vibe, kind of a Reanimator, House of Horrors, kind of a fun house type of a movie with a lot of just wild effects and just a kind of a zany story. It's a fun adventure to go on. It just doesn't have a whole lot of rewatch value in my opinion, but still well worth that first watch. And then Dead Snow is kind of a cult classic zombie movie in the vein again of Shaun of the Dead, but its sequel, Red vs. Dead, is way wilder. Now, some people still love the original because it is the original and it is very good, but the sequel I think just goes over the top. There's a full-scale battle and just really wild special effects where bodies are flying everywhere, and a lot of it is practical effects as well, and it looks good on screen. It's convincing, making it just a hell of an entertaining ride. This is a fantastic double feature. If you just want to see some wild shit on a Saturday night and buckets of blood, like I said, this is a fantastic double feature to watch. Now we're going to kind of dip back into the gangster genre with what is maybe the most interesting pairing on this list, with Seven Psychopaths and another new release called Arkansas. Now, Seven Psychopaths is from the same director as Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri. And while I understand why that movie was nominated for so many awards, I do think Seven Psychopaths is the better movie. Now, I will say, this one didn't really stick with me the first time I watched it, but recently I have rewatched it, and I love what was done with this movie. The dialogue is so interesting between all these characters. The storyline is so funny. The The dark humor that pops up all throughout this is great. The little vignettes you get as Colin Farrell is playing the screenwriter and he's telling sort of the stories that he's writing, those are all interesting, and those are even bloody. And I think this is one of Sam Rockwell's best performances. He's one of my favorite actors, and he is just in top form here. I mean, he's doing stuff. Yes, I get it's not dramatic and world-changing or anything, but it's a very tricky thing to pull off, the type of character that he plays in this movie, and he fucking nails it like he always does. I love this movie. If it's been a while since you've watched it, definitely consider revisiting it while it's on Prime. And then Arkansas is a new release movie from first-time director Clark Duke, who's a comedy actor you've probably seen in quite a few things, but he wrote and directed this movie, and it's got a good cast. The real gem of this, though, is Vince Vaughn. Not just his character, but his overall performance. I love everything about it. Now, this is about drug dealers in the South, and one of the things I really enjoyed about this movie is it really kind of shows organized crime in the South and how it's different from what you're used to seeing in movies other places. I'm from the South. I kind of appreciated the Southern flavor that was just all throughout this one. I felt like a lot of it was pretty accurate, just in terms of how people talk, how people behave, what places look like as you drive across the states down here. I dug that aspect of it a lot. And then you just end up with I think a good, solid crime story. There's nothing too crazy going on here. It's fairly complicated and fairly epic because it covers really long spanses of time as you're dealing with flashbacks and stuff. Just kind of a nice surprise of a crime movie that, again, was released during COVID, and a lot of people unfortunately missed it, but that's what you got me for, to recommend movies like this. Now, today's sponsor, Universal Yums. If you want good movie snacks and not just stuff that you can get at the grocery store, Universal Yums is the way to go. This is my latest box. It is packed with delicious stuff from Thailand. I say delicious. Some of this stuff was incredible. I mowed through it right as I opened the package, and then some of it was just weird. I kind of kept eating it, and it tasted kind of weird. It was not what I'm used to, but that's what was so interesting about it. In addition to that, your package comes with little factoids and games that pair up with the unique snacks in the package. And when you use the link in the description below, you can sign up for one of 3 different sizes at 3 different price points. They deliver it to your home every single month. You can cancel it at any time. Me and my wife make a thing out of it. It's always a fun night when we first open our Universal Yums box, because we're not just pigging out, even though we definitely are doing that. We're sort of having a nice night of it where we're learning about the stuff and we're playing the little games, and it's just something different to do to break up the boredom of COVID-19. But again, use the link in the description. They have been a fantastic sponsor, and I know a lot of you have been enjoying it. In fact, I just received a new box from Egypt. I can't wait to open that. Maybe you'll see what was in that one in an upcoming video. But let's go ahead and move on with the top 5 pairings on this list. Okay, I promised you early on that I had some lighter stuff on here, and I've talked about some that are lighter, but this pairing is by far the lightest, and it still manages to be pretty damn bloody with Pineapple Express and I Had a Bloody Good Time at House Harker. Now, Pineapple Express has been a long-time favorite of mine. I loved it when I saw it in the theater. I think it's hilarious. I think it is the Blues Brothers of my generation. So don't be offended of me comparing it to Blues Brothers. I actually think Blues Brothers is a comedic masterpiece, but it's the closest example I could draw because it's just this wild, over-the-top caper kind of thing. And the joke in Blues Brothers was, hundreds of cop cars just getting smashed in the last 10-15 minutes of the movie. Hilarious gag, expensive gag. Kind of the gag in Pineapple Express is everyone just keeps getting shot. Ears are blowing off, things are exploding, people are exploding. Danny McBride manages to keep coming back over and over again, and he's bloodier and more beaten every time. In fact, yours truly went as his character for Halloween the year that this movie came out. I love it, and it's way bloodier than you remember, and it's probably way funnier than you remember it being as well. Now, I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say the bloodiest movie on this list is also one of the funniest, and that is I Had a Bloody Good Time at House Harker. Just so happened with this list, another friend of the show, somebody I've had on multiple times, Derek Hagen, plays a really funny character in this. In fact, I'll put a link in the description below. He and I watched the movie together live. You can watch it with he and I with a lot of fun information about the production from him. But this is a really funny movie done on a very low budget. And without going into too many details, there is a giant house party that a vampire is turned loose in. And the gag in this one is that when vampires get staked, they explode, they pop. Blood goes everywhere. And then peppered throughout, there's just really good humor in this one. This is one that I sort of watched on a whim and was just surprised at how much I actually liked it. I watched it twice, I think in the same day. And then I have watched it a few times since. Just a good, fun little gem that I probably haven't talked about on this channel in about a year. Now my next pairing features a cult classic, gruesome horror movie that I know a lot of you probably haven't seen, along with a much newer horror movie that just pays homage to these types of cult classics. Now the first on this pairing is Eaten Alive. This is actually directed by Tobe Hooper, who is most famous for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Even though this movie predates Quentin Tarantino by several decades, it feels very much like the type of thing that Quentin Tarantino would draw inspiration from were he to do a direct horror movie, like more of a horror movie than Death Proof was. If he were to do a Texas Chainsaw Massacre style thing, this is one of the movies he would take things directly from, and he would be right to do so because this movie just oozes this cult classic vibe. It's so cool. This is about a motel with a crazy owner and a pet alligator. If that doesn't sell you on it and you don't want to watch some weird Tobe Hooper movie from the 70s, I don't know what else I can say about this movie to get you to watch it, but if that tickled your fancy, definitely check this one out. It's well worth watching. And then what I have paired with this one nicely is Cabin in the Woods. Cabin in the Woods is not a new release anymore. I mean, the thing's almost 10 years old, but in the world of horror, it's relatively new because it did such a good job of capturing elements from a bunch of cult classic movies, not just using them, but using them in a familiar way and then twisting things just enough to make it really, really interesting. I love everything about this movie. I love the control room guys. I love the gore and the way the horror plays out. I love this sort of wildness that sort of unfolds towards the end of the movie. If you've never seen it, I highly recommend it, but if you have, these two make a really great pairing, and they're probably the most different out of any of the pairings that I've done so far. They're very, very far apart kind of on this horror spectrum, but they work together so nicely. All right, the movies in my next double feature both come from Australia, and even though both movies are absolutely beautiful to look at, they're both really hard to watch. The first one is The Proposition. This is one of the best Western movies to have come out this century. I think it's absolutely fantastic. It takes place in the Australian West, which is not very different from the American West historically. There's a lot of similarities to be drawn. So if you're a Western fan, this one's gonna feel very familiar in a lot of ways, but then it's also a little bit off because the landscape looks fairly different. It's similar, but different. But then you get amazing performances from actors like Guy Pearce, who just almost never misses. And without going into too many details on the story, this one does feature some brutal acts by some brutal men and some acts of vengeance. And I should say there is a rape scene in both of these movies. It's handled with care. It's not too terrible as far as what's depicted on screen. I like to generally warn audiences of that because it can really kind of hit you over the head. Certainly if you're especially sensitive to that, but they play a role in both stories because these are brutal movies about a brutal time in Australian history. Now my second pick is Sweet Country, and I do think The Proposition is the better of these two by a decent amount, but Sweet Country is a little newer and it's very interesting, but this one is extremely slow. Not in a bad way, but buckle in. It's 2 hours and it's really kind of drawn out. But this one is about an Aboriginal man who kills a white man and goes on the run. The thing that was interesting about this is you get, obviously the racial elements are present, the historical elements are there. It's a tracking movie, kind of like Outlaw Josie Wales. They're tracking this guy for a long portion of the movie. And then there's sort of I almost want to say like a courtroom drama thing that unfolds at a certain point. yet it's not in a courtroom. It's literally in the dirt in the middle of a small sort of like shack town. It all, I think, works cinematically. This one, though, is a little bit more for not the art house crowd, but this one's not going to entertain you throughout. But if you want to watch sort of this historical drama that takes place in the Australian outback, it really is a good movie. Now, to avoid a mutiny on the channel, I had to include Ari Aster's double feature. Some of you already know what movies I'm getting ready to talk about. For those of you that don't, Ari Aster is the director of Hereditary and last year's Midsommar, which is what I'm going to call it. Now, Hereditary just came out a few years ago, and while it didn't necessarily reinvent a whole lot of things, it was the first movie of its kind in a long time, and that is sort of the event horror movie. So many of the wide release horror movies, meaning they come out in every theater in every city across the country at least, and a lot of times across the world, tend to be more like amusement park rides. They're meant to scare you, they're fun, they're exciting. Ari Aster's work feels more like something like The Exorcist, where a lot of people get interested by it. It's more highbrow than your typical horror movie. And to me, his films feel as if they're created to last a long time, meaning they're going to be enjoyable to watch 20 years from now. And a lot of what is created in horror is fairly disposable. Even classics I love from the 80s, they feel very much like they're from the 80s, and that's what I love about them. We're lucky that we're in a time where we love that 80s sensibility. That's not always the case, and Ari Aster's work definitely feels like something that's going to stand the test of time. Midsommar, I think, is less accessible than Hereditary. While I do like it, and I find a lot of film buffs have very high praise of this one, I find it to not quite work because it's not as entertaining to a broader audience. That doesn't mean it's not clever, creative, and actually pretty brilliant at times, but in terms of a recommendation, I cannot recommend it as strongly. So I would recommend, if you haven't watched these movies, to watch Hereditary. If you love it, definitely watch Midsommar. If you hate it and you don't like what he did with it, and you like your sort of like roller coaster ride horror movies, stay away from Midsommar. It's not going to do you any favors. And then I know you Ari Aster fans, you're wondering what could be better? What could be better than those two movies on Prime right now in terms of blood-soaked movies? And my answer is movies directed by S. Craig Zahler. Now, I find him to be one of the most interesting up-and-coming directors working today. He's only got a handful of movies under his belt. I find them all to be very interesting and clever, and I know a lot of you do as well because you give me such positive feedback on his work. So this double feature features Bone Tomahawk and Brawl in Cell Block 99. Now let's talk Bone Tomahawk. This is a Western. It is a kind of a classic Western. It's got a great cast led by Kurt Russell, who is one of my favorite actors. This is a slow burn. It takes quite a while getting in. The thing I like about this one is it feels kind of like a classic Western. You're kind of hitting standard beats that Westerns have. You're seeing things you've maybe kind of seen before, and then Zahler whacks you over the head with that Bone Tomahawk and gives you a completely different type of movie that is brutal and intense and unlike anything you would have seen in traditional Westerns. I love that aspect of it. There's some nasty stuff going on towards the end of this movie that I cannot show you on YouTube. Not only would this video get pulled, I would get banned, and I can't show you anything from the movie. Same goes for Brawl in Cell Block 99. Some of the best moments I can't show you, but this one's got kind of a slow intro too. In fact, the first half is not got a lot of action in it, but I found Vince Vaughn again to be very interesting. I guess I'm really loving what Vince Vaughn has been up to lately. But similar to how he handled the Western, he handles a prison movie where there's standard beats, you're kind of following it, and then all of a sudden something changes and the tone is different, and it's got this weird, almost unnatural tone to it that I absolutely love. I don't know where he's coming up with this flavor that he's created in these movies, including his newest one, Dragged Across Concrete, but I love what he's done. In fact, watching his work, I can see him sort of honing that and figuring it out and improving that flavor even better, just the way a chef is gonna create a dish. He's working towards something, and I'm super excited to see what it is, if this is what he's creating along the way. I love it. I'll stop gushing. I love all these movies, these two in particular. Let me know in the comments what you plan on watching. While you're there, also send a quick thank you to the Patreon supporters. If you'd like to become a Patreon supporter and see your name featured here, there is a link in the description. There's also a link where you can become a channel member right here on YouTube. You pay a monthly fee and you get access to bonus content. Follow either link, see if they're for you. But however you choose to support the show, it's much appreciated. And I will keep making these videos as long as you keep watching them. Thanks for watching this blood-soaked episode, and you will see me on the next one.